Okay, let's see here. Okay, we are live on a damp, dismal 2/22/22 Tuesday. So greetings to everyone. Okay, all right, so today we're going to work on some metal clay earrings. We're going to do some textured and stacked earrings. Let me move the camera down here. And these are the ones that we're doing. Well, actually, I'm not going to do the triangles, at least I don't think I am. Always subject to change, you know. But we have these little silver metal clay earrings. There's 3 different sizes. All right, so they're kind of fun. They have nice movement with the 3 layers, and you can texture them however you like. Let me just do one thing here on my laptop. And hopefully, yeah, I can see your comments now. Good afternoon, everybody. Hey, Chris, Tammy, Mary, Benira, Carol. Great. All right. We've got some people here. All right. Hey, Marianne. Okay. So what I'm using today, and I know my camera is backwards, so you can't see the words in the right orientation, but I am using Art Clay Silver. There are many different brands of metal clay on the market. This just happens to be the one that I learned on, so you know, I've never been disappointed with it, so I've just stuck with it. But there are a lot of people using different ones, and I can't really speak about the others because I haven't tried them. I think pretty much people tend to stick with what they learned with, unless they're disappointed in some way. But so far, Art Clay Silver has never failed me. Hey, Deb. I'm doing good, thank you. Hey, Paula. Hi, Monica. All right, people are coming on. Okay, so what I did, or what I'm going to do, is if you haven't worked with silver clay or metal clay before, I'll go through just some of the basic things, some of the basic tools that you need. And you need a clay roller. This is just a piece of plexiglass in a round, but there are many different types of clay rollers available. You could probably even use a pipe if you wanted to. The diameter doesn't really make much difference. So you need some, let's see here. You need some measuring slats, which I will use so that you know what their purpose is. They come in different thicknesses. There's lots of different measurements. I'm going to be using the green. If you don't have slats of your own and you want to try to do this as economically as you can make the comparable measurements with playing cards, just ordinary playing cards. And the green measures 3 playing cards thick. So there's like a bunch of different sizes for that. So just so you know that that's an option that you can use. But we're going to be using the green, which there is a little cheat sheet here that came with them. And the green measures 0.75 millimeters, for whatever that's worth. So you want to use your clay wisely because it's not inexpensive. So sometimes having extra thickness isn't really necessary. Really depends on the piece that you're going to be making. And with these little tri-stacked earrings, you don't really want them to be thick because then they're going to be heavy. If heavy doesn't bother your ears, well, you know, that's great for you, but I don't like heavy earrings at all. So these make the clay go farther if you're not making them too thick. All right. Hey, Kathy. All right. So what else am I using? I am using what they call a Teflex sheet. It is a non-stick material. I don't know what it is actually, but it's something that you can use with the clay and it won't stick to it. You can buy that online at places that sell materials for the art clay, or you can get a roll of it at the craft stores. They have that like in the stamping and inks department. There's a long roll of it, and it's like $20, but there's a lot of it in there. So it should last you pretty much a lifetime if you're just doing this for yourself. But they do come in handy. And let's see here. What else? You will need some release spray, mold release spray, which there's a great site on the internet called Cool Tools USA or US, and they have all the products that you could possibly want, but there are other places as well. Let's see. So you need that. You will need some. Let's see. You will need some templates. There are tons and tons of templates out there, depending on what you want to make. Today I'm just using kind of a teardrop shape for the earrings, but there's a lot of these out there, and there are also texture stamps that are out there. These happen to, I'm not really sure where I got these, online somewhere, but these are little rubber mats that have the textures, which are pretty cool. These are like Zentangles. Gwen from Rolling Mill Resources makes the paper patterns also that are specifically for metal clay. So they're a little bit different than the rolling mill patterns, but they hold up well with the release spray. So that's something good to know. You also need a lubricant for your hands. This is called Nature's Touch. It's a non-stick hand conditioner and release agent. So there's that. Because the clay will stick to your hands, gets in all your dry skin, and you're wasting a lot of clay. So you want to make sure that your hands are lubricated well. What else? A craft knife. Craft knife is very handy. There are needle tools that some people use to cut around the templates. I tend to use the craft knife. You just have to be careful that you're not cutting through the Teflex sheet that you're working on, or cut into your templates. But a lot of the times I will trace around the template with the back side, not the sharp side of the blade. So that's handy. You will need some sanding things. You need sanding things. I happen to like the 3M sanding sponges. They come in different grits, and I mostly use the fine, but there are, different grits. There's an extra fine, there's medium, there's coarse, but the fines I find really good. And I also have a little set of little tiny diamond needle files that are very handy to get in those little tight spots in your clay. So that's also very handy. Let's see. I'm just checking here on the comments before I go too far. Mary's asking if there are any challenges with using thinner slats, or does that adversely affect the results? It does, because you can make your clay too thin, actually too thin, and it's hard to handle it, work with it. I personally don't go any lower than the greens. There are a couple of colors, the black and the yellow on this little grid here are the thinnest ones, and I will basically use the green or the blue in thickness, which the blue would be 4 cards thick, 4 playing cards thick. So and I will have all of this information in my handout at the end of the demo. So, and you can always ask me questions if I'm not answering or covering a specific area. Where did I get the small files? I wish I knew. I bought these so long ago, and I've never seen another exact set, but I did pick up a set it's a little longer. These are still small, but they're not the 6-inch. These are 4-inch, I believe. And I would go with the smaller files. The smaller you can get, the better, because, you know, like I said, if you have to get in little tight curves and little tight areas, the smaller the file, the better. So, Tammy, you said you got yours from Harbor Freight. Were they little? Were they tiny? Or are they the standard 6-inch needle files? I suppose you could use the 6-inch if you have those. I would just be very careful because the clay is pretty fragile. Even though it's dry, it's still pretty fragile. Hi, Anna. Okay, let's see. Suni's asking me if you can use Vaseline on your hands. I never have. I think that might be a little bit too thick, possibly. You can use olive oil. You can use that. That's perfectly fine to use that. I just don't care for the smell of it. I like to eat it, but I don't like to have it on my hands. So that always works real good. And Dawn's saying it's good to wait for a sale at Cool Tools. And that's absolutely true. They have sales from time to time, and you can get a lot more bang for your buck when you do that. Hey, Mary. Okay. All right. So those are some of the things. Also, a nice thing to have is a agate burnisher. It's not so important if you have a tumbler. If you have a tumbler, you can do the work that this agate burnisher does in a shorter amount of time. Also, a little steel or brass brush. This is a really teeny tiny one, but I found it in my drawer, and I thought I'm going to test this one out because I don't think I've ever used this one. But typically they're a lot taller brush, but that doesn't matter. The only thing I will say with these brushes, as you use them, they kind of splay out a little bit, and when you're brushing and you're holding these little pieces, you can do a number on your hands. So, you know, just be careful when you're using that. You will also need a timer. You can either have a little kitchen timer, or you can use the timer on your phone. And another thing that I have are these little, they're little like cookie cutters, but they're for clay. These are made by Kemper with a K. I will have that information in the handout as well. There's different shapes and sizes. No, you don't have to have these, but they're nice. They're nice to have, especially for this project. They're pretty handy. I'll show you how those work too as we go along. Then we're going to need our standard soldering stuff, which is just for this, just a solder brick, a pair of tweezers, a heat-proof surface, a quench cup, and a butane torch. I don't use anything stronger than a butane torch for metal clay because you can annihilate it real fast. So just keep that in mind. And I also use a fluffy, dry paintbrush. When we sand our pieces later on, after we're done sanding, then I'm going to dust off all that extra clay residue before we fire. Okay, so let's get started, I guess. I will move the camera down. I am going to use a 10-gram package of art clay silver. That should be just enough to make this project. And you know, before you open your package of clay, I mean, you need to know what you're doing, which direction you're heading, so that way you use your clay wisely. And if you have a bigger package than you need, then you're going to have leftover clay to deal with. And that's okay, except you need to store it. And I've got this little clay keeper jar that has a sponge that you just moisten, and then you can put your clay inside here. The thing with clay, when you keep it, it has a tendency to grow mold on it. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's kind of gross, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. You can still use the clay even if it has mold on it. You can pick it off if you want, or you can just incorporate it into the clay and it will just burn off. It's not really a huge deal. It doesn't really affect the clay other than the fact that it looks gross. The clay typically shrinks about 7 to 10% during the firing process. It's like it happens right before your eyes, and it's really hard to even notice it, but it does happen. I had reconstituted some dry clay, which I have right here. I'm going to turn the camera down. And I save all my little bits of dry clay. Now, this is prior to firing. Say if you make something, mold something, and you don't like it and it's dry, it's no longer usable because it's dried. You can save all those little bits in a jar and then reconstitute it when you have enough to work with. And I do have a demo on that I did a while back. So, you know, you can always refer to that if you get to that point where you have clay and you want to make it usable again. So I did this a couple of days ago. Let me get some lube on my hands here. And I did reconstitute some. I have a little coffee grinder that is dedicated solely for this. But it's still a little bit wet. It's wetter than what you're going to get right out of the package. So I can let this dry a little bit out in the air and make it usable. But right now it's a little bit too soft. So I'm going to set it to the side because I may end up using a little bit of it today. So I'm just going to put a little bit of this conditioner on my Teflex sheet. It's kind of like buttering a cookie sheet, but you don't want to put an overly large amount on it, just enough to keep it from sticking. If you didn't have this on your hands, you would have a huge layer of clay all over your hands that's not usable. So why waste the money? So I'm going to get my slats ready here and open my clay. There's instructions in there, but I believe they're all in Japanese, so it may not do you any good. So this, folks, is 10 grams of silver clay. And it's nice and soft, it's fresh. You don't really have to knead it when it first comes out, not in my experience anyway. Let me make sure I get my eyeballs on here. Open my package. And I want to get every little bit of that off of there. All right, so I've got my piece on my Teflex sheet. All right, and this is much more, well, I should say it's less wet than the homemade one for right now. I'm just going to take my roller and I'm going to put some of the lubricant on my roller as well, and I'm just going to give it a roll, turn it the other way. All right, it's not much. It's really, it's kind of like, how am I going to get 2 pairs of earrings out of that? But you will. All right, so that's the level, the height of the clay right now. And then I'm going to take one of my texture mats. It doesn't really matter which one. And I'm going to give it a spritz of the lubricant, because you don't want that clay getting all stuck in those areas there. Then it's really hard to get out. And then I'm going to lay my texture down, and I'm going to give it one roll and lift it up, and then you've got your pattern on there. Now, if I wanted to use my clay cutters, I'm gonna go ahead and show you. I'm gonna cut one. I'm gonna re-roll this later. But if I wanted to use my clay cutters, these have like a little plunger on here, and you can just decide where you want to cut it. Press it down. Sometimes the clay stays inside here, and then you have to plunge it out. When you plunge it out, be careful not to plunge too hard, because then you're going to get the impression of that little round plunger in there. But you can just lift that up, and that makes a nice cut. It's pretty even. So, oh, I forgot, this is a clay cutter. It's like a little spatula. It's very thin, and you can just kind of go underneath your clay and pick it up. And then you could transfer that piece. Well, I didn't go far enough, I guess, with the things that you need. You could put this on a cup warmer to dry. You could put it in a dehydrator, like a food dehydrator that's dedicated just to this, or you could let it air dry. I happen to have a food dehydrator, so I would take this and bring it over to the dehydrator and let that dry. They have to be bone dry before you fire them. All right, but I'm not going to use this piece, so I'm going to put that back together. I just wanted to show you the plunger because they're very cool. I don't have a teardrop shape in the plungers, though, in the little cutters, unfortunately. I don't know if they make them or not, but I've not seen them. So you want to handle the clay as little as possible, because the more you mess with it, your hands dry it out, and it will dry out on its own. So you don't want it to get too dry. All right, so we'll put that back down there. That's not even. Okay, and now I'm going to put my texture over it again. and give it one roll. Okay. Are you seeing that okay? Okay, then I'm going to take my shape template, wherever I put it. I just had it here a second ago. This is typical if you guys watch me often. Here it is. I put my textures over it. All right, so now I'm going to take my shape template and start cutting my pieces. And where is this? I'm going to put that over there. And I'm going to take my craft knife, and I've got the back side of the knife that I'm tracing out the shape from the template. And I don't want to cut into my Teflex sheet, so I'm being careful not to do that. So I'm going to cut that. I don't really care for those designs too much, so I'm going to redo that part. And when you cut these, you want to cut them as cleanly as you can and have as few ragged edges as possible, so you have less cleanup later on. So I'll pick up my piece, transfer it to here, and we'll start all over again. It's kind of like dough. Kind of like you're making dough. All right. I did like that design. Where did I get it from? Oh, I think over here. I still got more of that other, but that's okay. They don't have to match, and maybe they really shouldn't, you know. They're just, they're kind of cool just the way they are. I think it was this one that I was using. Yes. So we'll go with part of this and part of that. I'll cut this one, and then I'll go and check for comments or questions. Okay. Now this clay that I have left over right here, I'm going to put it in the bag and close that up while we're talking, because I don't want that to dry out. And I'll pick this piece up. Get back there. Okay. All right, so I've got my my larger pieces right now for the earrings. All right, let me check here. All right. Okay. Hey, Janet. Okay. Hey, Deb. Yep, Marianne, you're right. Cool Tools is a great resource. Yep, they are. I've gotten a lot of products through them. Yep, the Kemper stamps too. Those are cool. I get a lot of stuff from Art Clay World as well. They have a nice variety. Hey, Kathy. Mary is asking, is the Nature Touch Balm? Actually, what I use in the Potter dies is the Cool Slip. I'll still use this. Basically, I use this for my hands and to just kind of butter the sheet down there. But in the actual molds, I just do the spray, and I do it lightly. And that really helps. You can, Mary, you can use some of the red rubber stamps. It just depends on the depth. It has to have a good depth in the stamp or in the texture. So I have used some, but they as far as rubber stamps go, but some of them just aren't deep enough, or their lines are too fine, and then you actually don't see the design as well. All right. Deb says when she made teddy bears, she had rubber stamps made with my designs. Okay, that's cool. And made PMC pendants using the stamps. That's very cool. Yep, you can do lots of really cool things with metal clay. Okay. All right, so I'm going to keep moving here. All right, so I'm going to regroup. I'm going to check on this little clay turd that I have here. Sorry, I can't help myself. Ugh. It's getting better. Normally you would never leave your clay out like this, but when it's super wet like this, you know, from the reconstituted, making your own, it's kind of necessary if I want to use it soon. All right, I'm going to make sure that I've got enough butter on here. I shouldn't say that because it's not butter, but I don't want to confuse you. You're right about that, Deb. I'm bad. I really am bad. I'm sorry. Actually, no, I'm not sorry, but you got to take me for what I am. All right, so I'll roll that out. All right, and get a little different area of the texture. Give it one roll. All right, so now I have a whole different pattern here. Where's my, oh, here it is. All right, so now I'm going to go down. I used this size, whichever this size is, and I am going to cut on here. Make sure you don't have any clay on your blade. Now, if you notice, I am not making a hole in these. I'm going to punch the hole with a little hole punch after they're fired. And what I've done is I've already cut out these shapes a couple of days ago and let them dry so that they'll be ready to fire, so you'll be able to see the entire process. All right, so I'm going to take these two out. You have to keep putting this stuff back on because your hands just absorb it See if I can do a little bit better with that. All right. Let's go with you could remove your slats when you're doing the texture mat, but this one might not work out so well. It might be too thin. Yeah, we'll just take that out. See, if you didn't spray, in fact, this needs a little bit more, but if you hadn't sprayed this, that would have been a real fiasco trying to get that out of your texture mat. All right. Got some clay on my roller here. Get rid of that. All right. That came off much better. All right, so now we're going to go down one more. You wouldn't think that you'd have enough in the 10 grams to make 2 stacked earrings, but it's surprising. But there again, you know, I didn't make them very thick. Oh, I slipped. I slipped and cut. That might be larger than I really want. I'll take a look at that in a minute. Turned over. Okay, so here are my 6 pieces for the earrings, and I still have a little wad left, which is fine because I can either put it together with this clay or I can make something else in a little while with that extra piece of clay. This is starting to dry up a little bit, so that's good. I'm going to use one of the potter molds later on and make a couple of pendants. I had made a cross and this heart or this flower pendant the other day, and I posted it online just to show them off, and somebody wanted to buy them, so it's like, okay, but I need to make them for me now because I really wanted them for me. All right, let me look here again. So now, hey Jazz. All right. Let's see. Deb saying she would print a copy of the mat out. Oh, when you were doing your pieces? Okay. Cool. This is just way fun. I like regular sheet metal and stuff like that too, but you can do a lot with metal clay that you can't do with sterling wire or sheet. And this turns out to be fine silver, which is pretty cool. And so I'm just wiping off the grease on these things. And then I'm going to set these pieces aside to dry, the ones that I just cut in front of you here. And then I'm going to take the pieces that I've already done that are dry. Excuse me just a minute here. All right, I have those pieces, and I want to make sure that I get all this junk off my hands now, because I don't want to incorporate any moisture whatsoever into this dry clay. Do this again. Mary, so far I haven't had any trouble with the clay releasing. In fact, maybe when I'm done with this, I can take that wad of clay and we can do one of those just for the heck of it. All right, so these pieces are already dried, and now they require sanding. Just a little sanding, a little refining. They shouldn't need much, because like I mentioned, when you're cutting your design from your template, you want to try to cut it as clean as you can so you have less cleanup later. It all kind of makes sense. So let's see here. All right, so I've got a fine 3M sanding sponge and my little needle files, which I probably won't need my needle files on this because there's no twists and turns, you know, like if you were doing, just say for an example, a fly or a bee or something like that, or a butterfly, and you've got those little little curves, you know, from the shape, then you need to get in there with something like those little teeny needle files. So I'm just going to hold your piece firmly, but not so firm that you're going to crack it. That's very important. If you can keep one edge on the table, you know, that might help you. If you're a little bit unsteady, that might help too. But we're just going to clean this up. Now, if you have a design where sanding it is really iffy, you can always fire the piece, and then you can use your flex shaft or power tools or whatever to clean it just like any other piece of metal. So I'm just going to make sure that I don't have any ridges sticking up. It's really quite an instant gratification project once your clay is dry. But if you think ahead, you can get the clay going and drying, and maybe do something else in the meantime. If you have the cup warmer or the dehydrator, that will speed up your drying time immensely. And one way to tell if your clay is dry, if you took it out of a dehydrator, or, well, any of the ways, you'd take a mirror, just a piece of mirror, and you'd lay your piece on the mirror and then pick it up. And if there's any condensation on the mirror, your clay is still not dry. Okay, so you want to make sure that when you pick up your clay, there's nothing there. Any form of condensation will potentially ruin your piece, because what happens is once you introduce the flame to that, the clay will bubble and pop or whatever. It'll be ruined. So you want to avoid that happening. All right. So I've got that piece, and I'm going to take my dry paintbrush and clean that all off. You want to get rid of all that little clay dust that's in there. And then I'm going to set that on my soldering brick. And I'll move to a next one. I'll check on comments in just a minute. The thing that you have to realize, if you're going to do the powder dyes or any impression dye, you can use the brass dyes if you have those. You can use silicone molds if you have those. They're all very usable for this technique. You just have to prep them. The silicone molds don't necessarily need any release spray. They usually come out really well without it. But just for a little insurance, I always give them just a little bit of a spritz. If you have any stuff on the back, any little defects or whatever, you want to give the back a hit just to make sure that it's nice and clean. And all of this dust that by the time I'm done, I'll have a nice little pile of dust, and that will go into a little scrap jar for my metal clay. And that all goes towards reconstituting. When I get enough to that point, then I will get my little coffee grinder out and mix it all up. Okay, set that to the side. I think I was starting to talk about the impression dyes. Oh, the shrinkage rate. You have to realize that the impression that you're filling, like when you fill this impression, your piece is not going to be quite this large. You're going to lose some. That's just a normal occurrence with metal clay. So you need to take that in consideration. Also, some molds work, or some impression dyes work better than others. Some won't work at all. Some of the real shallow patterns I haven't had good success with. I would not go any deeper than an impression like this, because you're going to use an enormous amount of clay if your impression is really large. And you know, if that's not a problem for you cost-wise, well, then I'd say go ahead and go for it. But there's two things with that. You use a lot of clay, and the larger you get, I wouldn't torch fire anything larger than this piece. It would need to go in a kiln if they're much larger, just to make sure that they're fired all the way through. So, and I can't say that I've done anything that large. I always torch fire. So generally, anything bigger than a quarter or so, you know, I try to keep it around there for the torch firing. Okay. So if I just happen to have my fingers wet a little bit, I could not fire. Oh, I broke my piece. Oh my God. Well, I can patch that up. I won't do that right now, but I can patch that up with a little bit of clay. I can take a little piece of that clay and add a little tiny bit of water and make a little paste, and then I can put it on with paintbrush. So there's always, I shouldn't say always, there's oftentimes remedies for this, for little accidents like that. And probably the reason, because I don't think I was mishandling that, but probably because I've got these deep ridges as my design, that's probably a weakened spot. So if you're not super careful, which maybe I wasn't because I'm yapping here. Maybe it was just weak enough that that it cracked. So sometimes less is more, like I was saying. If you don't feel that you can refine this so well this way, if you're afraid that it's going to break, you could fire it first, and then you can refine it afterwards with your rotary tools. All right. Well, I won't be able to have both parts of the earring done, but at least I'll have one. That's the other downfall of having thin pieces as well, is the thinner they are, the more fragile they are. But I did this purposely because I don't want the weight for myself on my ears. But you saw I had enough extra clay that I could have made them a little bit thicker and not run out of clay. All right, so I'll set this stuff to the side and get ready to fire. But first, I'll check questions. All right. All right, Mary, you're asking, could you roll some silver clay as sheet and press into deeper molds if you support the back piece with something like a light bulb while drying? Or does that not work well? You know what? I've never tried anything like that, Mary. That's where experimenting comes in. And I haven't experimented with that. Maybe that's something I can try in the future and see how that works, because some of them you don't necessarily need a solid press, although it does make a nice substantial piece when they're solid like that. But I've not ever tried that. Suni, you're asking, you use your coffee grinder with water? No, the coffee grinder would just be for the dry clay. You would just grind it all to a fine powder and then put it in a container. And then you would add water very gradually, just a few drips at a time, because you only have so much powder, and if you put so much, too much water in it, then you've got nothing to, add to it to make it thicker. So I just take like a bottle cap, a small bottle cap, and put some water in it, and I just put a couple of drips at a time, and mix it up. So that way that doesn't happen. All right, so now I'm going to get my, I don't think I brushed this one. It doesn't look like it, but maybe I did. All right, you only need to fire the clay for 2 minutes. It doesn't take that long, and sometimes, if you haven't watched the firing of metal clay, you could be a little surprised, because as soon as you put the heat to the metal clay, it will often, more likely than not, flame up just a little bit, and it's only for a second or two, and then the fire goes away. Also, while you're firing, the piece may curl up, and you're thinking, oh, it's getting all distorted, it's going to be ruined. Generally, it lays right back down. After it curls up, then you can watch it just kind of lay back down. If your piece fires with a curl in it, or a curve, whatever, you can, once it's fired fully, you can take it to a bench block and like a rawhide mallet, and you can just press it down and it'll restore its shape. All right, so generally the rule of thumb is to do one piece at a time, but if the pieces are small, sometimes I do two together, and that's what I'm going to do here, just to go a little bit quicker with this. All right, so I've got my timer ready to go, but I'm not going to actually press the timer button until I start to see a very faint hint of orange, very faint. You can, you want to hit it at that point. You also don't want to go too close to the clay. You can melt it if you're too aggressive with your flame. When you start to see it turn a bright orange, you want to back off with your heat because you are going to have a puddle. Excuse me just a bit. I have to wet my whistle there. Okay, so, and sometimes if you have too much heat on it as well, it starts to turn a shiny silver as you're heating it. So you want to kind of back off on those things. There's just a few things to know about that, but they're important things that will either make or break your piece. So I'm going to get my torch here on here and just kind of go all the way around. Now it smokes just a tiny bit. And here's a little bit of fire, a little flame. That's all normal. Don't freak out and drop your torch and say, oh my God, I'm catching everything on fire, because you're not. And just as quickly as it went out. Now it's changing a little bit of color. It's also curving a little bit. And it's just starting, this piece here, just more, maybe I've got the heat more on there, but that little faint hint of orange is just starting to come out. So I push the timer button. So now it's going to count back for 2 minutes. And during this process, the clay is shrinking, but it's really hard for your eye to really grasp that. I'm not super close to the clay and not super far away either. I just hold it in relation to the color that I'm seeing on the pieces that I'm firing. It's got a little orange glow inside. That's good. And I'm circulating the flame so all areas get even heat. You want to make sure that the clay is cooked all the way through. They call that being sintered, S-I-N-T-E-R-E-D, sintered. That means it's cooked all the way through. If it's not, your piece can break, and you can see the raw clay. It'll be dry, but it'll be raw clay. It won't be metal. It's just amazing to me how this process works, and that this can actually be done. But if you ever look at people that, metal clay artists, some of the fabulous things that they do in sculpture and different things, I mean, this is just the most basic beginnings of metal clay. I'm just going to give that a little hit more, because I think I should have had it a little bit closer to the flame. All right, so theoretically it is now metal. So I'm going to pick up my piece of clay. Just give it a second. Quench it. And I don't want to get my solder board wet from the tweezers. Okay. And it's now metal. It's pretty cool, huh? Let me go ahead and finish. I'll dry my fingers again. Because if the clay was not dry, it would have blistered and bubbled, popped, whatever. It is said 2 minutes regardless, but not regardless of the size. I mean, it is and it isn't. I mean, a little piece like this will take 2 minutes, just like a piece like this. If we're talking a huge piece, you know, I might give it a little bit longer, but if it needs more than a couple of minutes or 3 at the most, then that probably should have gone in the kiln, is my answer to that. All right, let me do these two. Smoke again, the fire happens almost instantly. All right, it's just starting to change color. So I set the timer. You can see this piece is curved a little bit. It'll lay back down. It will relax after it's gotten the heat. I should have given these other two pieces a little bit more heat, like, see the orange color on these? Should have gotten them a little bit hotter from the get-go. But we'll find out if they don't work. But generally speaking, I have had a minimal amount of problems doing clay like this. And when I do, it's usually operator error and not anything due to the clay. You see that already had laid back down, that larger piece. I'm not sure why that happens, you know, but it does. I can see the demo, the video is a little bit pixelated. That one I'm going to shut off right there exactly at the 2 minutes because it did keep its color. I did get it to the right color for the entire time, so there should be no issue with those not being cooked. And they're thin enough that they should be. All right, so put this to the side. And now I will take that little puny brush and get it wet. You see how the pieces had turned white when they're fired? They're just kind of whitish, like a frosty color. Well, we're going to get rid of that with this little brush. And also, in the grooves of a pattern, you know, that white kind of gets stuck in there. So that's why the wire brush is really kind of a nice thing to help get that whiteness out of there. Oh, I'm disappointed that the broadcast is so pixelated. There's no rhyme or reason to why that happens, at least that I'm aware of. Some days we get good quality, and other days it kind of stinks. I would normally be doing this over the sink, but I can't right now. All right, so that piece cleaned up pretty nice in comparison to get that white off. And from there, you could tumble it. I'm going to just clean up these other two pieces to make the earring. You could tumble it and get it to a nice high shine, or you could take it to your rotary tool and get a high shine that way if you like doing that. I like the tumbler because once you put it in, you don't really have to do anything more. But if you don't have one, you can always use the agate burnisher if you get one of those. So when I first learned to do this, I didn't have a tumbler available. So so the agate burnisher was all I used. And you can still get a decent shine with it. But I like the tumbler better. Actually, I like this little brush. It seems to be not so dangerous to your hand as those longer bristles. But I imagine it'll get pokey just the same over time. Oh, I just poked myself, so yeah. You could clean these up with a rotary tool as well. If you have some of those 3M bristle brushes, you could get in those texture lines as well. Right there. All right. This one I'll clean later because I don't need that right now. All right, so now I'm going to punch my holes. There's my handy dandy hole punch. And for these, I'm just going to use punch pliers. And I'll probably do it from, well, I guess this way. You can measure it, you know, to make sure that you're getting your hole right where you want it. But you know, I eyeball just about everything. Okay. Okay, so I've got my holes punched, and now I'm going to take my agate burnisher. And this will only polish the top surface. You're not going to get in between those grooves, where if you put it in a tumbler, it would pretty much polish all over. But, you know, this is perfectly doable. Can you see that? The shine on that? It's pretty amazing. And if it was a little bit wonky, you could flatten it out, like I said earlier, with a rawhide hammer and a bench block. I don't think I got myself a jump ring. Now the handout that I'm going to post later on is mostly mine with my pictures of the process, the steps of the process. But the written part, for the most part, is from Art Clay World, which I did get permission to use. I am a certified instructor for Art Clay, so that's not really a problem. So it might be, the instructions might say a little bit different than what I've said, but I tried to make some notations on there as well, so so I don't lead you into bad information. All right, so those are the 3 pieces there, and let me grab my pliers. Hang on just a minute. Got to get a couple jump rings. I think what I'll do is I'll take it off, because I don't have jump rings on the table. I'm just going to take it off of one pair, already done, and just assemble it so you can see the finished project. All right, so I'll take this large one, medium, and the little one. And there we go. That's pretty cool for a minimal amount of time spent on that. In my opinion, I think that that's a pretty neat earring. So, all right, let me see if there's any other. All right, Kathy's asking, how long does unopened clay keep in the packaging? as long as you can still feel it, like if it's malleable in your hands, soft, it should be fine. If it's hard, you can reconstitute it like I was mentioning before with the coffee grinder. Such a show off. You're right. No, I just think they're very cool. It's simple but cool. Deb, you're asking if I do it too long, what happens? You mean like fire it too long? Or what? Please explain that to me. So Kathy, in regards to, you'd have to feel the package. If the package still feels soft, I would say go ahead and take a chance, trying it. You can always add a couple of drops of water to it if it's not like super hard. And also, put it in a jar or wrap it in plastic with a couple of drops of water to like rehydrate it a little bit. You can do that. Yeah, you can add a gemstone. You would do that afterwards, in my opinion. You would clean up your piece, fire it like we did, clean up the piece, and then you could put a little bezel cup or a tube setting on there and just use easy solder. Try to get in and get out so that you don't melt anything, but absolutely you can solder on metal clay for sure. Yeah, fire too long. You fire too long, you're gonna get a puddle. It's just gonna all melt. It'll distort, melt, that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean there's so many things, like I said, that you can do with that. And Mary, if you're still there and you want me to put that in a mold, in one of Potter's impression dies, I can do that with that extra clay that I have. But yeah, I like these. I like these a little bit better than the original ones that I made for the handout. I was so afraid I was going to go over the 10-gram package because I wanted to let you see what 10 grams will make, so you get a better concept of what 10 grams is. But you can definitely make a nice pair of earrings, far bigger. You could make a couple of pairs of earrings like this for sure. So, yeah. Okay. All right. So, we were talking about the impression die. This one is rather large. I do want to do one of these, so let's see. I may need to combine. Let me get regrouped here. All right. All right, so that was my Kaka one that I'm going to try to fix. All right, let's see here. I need to spray this. Oh, and for the pendant, they make these little pre-made embeddable bails. Which is the only tricky part to doing this, is getting that in the... Boy, this really sucks. Are you guys getting a terrible picture that I'm seeing here? Because that really is not helpful. Suni, I don't know exactly how much a 10-gram package is, but that's easily enough to to look up. I want to say maybe around $30-ish, something like that. Not positive. Something like that. I've had this clay a while. So before prices were going up. All right, so here's the piece I had left over, and I'm going to incorporate that in my homemade. And let's see. All right, this is way more than I need, but it's a better consistency now. So I'm going to pinch off some of this, put it in the thing. And just press it in. And then I've got this little piece of acrylic here that I'm just going to push it down on. And there you go. I should have put some release on the top of this thing. I didn't think about it. Usually it doesn't come off on this. Usually it's still in the, it stays in the mold. So I'm going to lay that down and then take my craft knife and trim very carefully around the border. To me, this beats all the pressing that you have to do. But like I said, you lose some of the size. It's kind of a compromise. So that's cut out. I'm going to just try to tap in some of that roughness around the edges. And then take my little embeddable bail. See how it's got little tab right here, and that goes inside the clay. And you want to make sure that you get it in the center and not poke through the back or the front. And also, you want to make sure that it's seated far enough in so that when the clay shrinks, you're not going to have that stem sticking out. So there's a few things you have to think about there. I'm going to gently flip that over and check the back because I wanted to make sure that that little bail didn't go through. Okay. So like I said, the cleaner it is now, the less you have to mess with it later. But, you know, if you risk screwing it up, it's better to clean it later. So Mary, does that answer your question? Hopefully. Yeah, Suni, the difference, they're pretty much all the same formulas, I believe. You know, it's just a lot of people just tend to stick with what they learned with. You know, they're familiar with it. There's lots of different varieties out there too now. There's the sterling silver, which is probably a little bit less money than the fine silver is. But like I said before, I'm happy with this product and I just stay with it. I guess I'm just a creature of habit. Good, Mary. Okay, yeah, so then I would just take this to the dehydrator and let it dry, and then it'll be a good long while because this is a really thick piece. So you want to take that into consideration. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this stuff is totally doable, you know, in metal clay. But, you know, you just have to kind of weigh your options. Some things it wouldn't be practical to make out of metal clay just because of the expense. But, you know, for the things that are, you have a lot more options available. I have a lot of these little bronze dies that I've bought through one of the other Facebook groups, and they work great for the clay too, you know. So some of those are a little bit less expensive, although nothing's not expensive anymore. Let's see here. Mary, if your packages are hard, look up, if you want to, in the group page under the featured, on the main page of the group page, the very top post, it says featured. If you click on that, it opens up a document of listing all of the demos that I've done since the very beginning. And that metal clay one is maybe, it's not on the bottom, but it's maybe a few months after I started doing these demos. So that would be a good one to watch. If I think of it, I'll link it on the post after when I put up the handout, and then that way you can see how I did that with the coffee grinder. But you know, what I would suggest is, you know, like maybe go to a thrift store or something. Maybe you can find an old coffee grinder, you know, for a couple of bucks rather than buy a new one for that. You know, and then just keep that dedicated for that purpose. But if you need any help with it, just let me know, and I'll try to walk through it. Gina, you know when it's dry, well, a piece that size is going to take a while to dry. Several hours at least in a dehydrator. If it was air dry, I'd say a few days probably for that size thickness. But you know it's dry when you pick up your piece and you lay it on a piece of mirror, and then you pick it up you just lay it briefly, lay it on the mirror, and then pick it up. If there's condensation on the mirror, there's still moisture in the clay. So it's not dry. It's not dry enough to fire. Make sure that they are bone dry, or they're going to pop and split and crack, whatever, and be ruined, because you know it's going to happen right where the design is, you know, where the important part is. That's just the way it is. Good. I'm glad you've got one. Even that thicker impression. Yeah, I mean, if any piece has any moisture in it, when you place it on the mirror and there's condensation, it's not dry. So you just wait till it's dry. Don't be anxious, because you'll be sorry. You'll be sad if your piece gets ruined. Oh, hey, Carol. Good. Well, you're welcome, Gina. All right. So I'm going to post the handout and on the group page next week. I may be doing a prong setting. It's a very simple one, but a prong setting for larger stones. And I've only just started doing that, just experimenting with it. So I can just show you how I'm doing it. And I may do that, or I may do that beaded 3-wrap bracelet. I don't know. I never know what I'm doing. Susan, I think I probably did go like 3 minutes on this larger piece for my last one. Just because it's so thick. But you know, if you're uncomfortable that and you had a kiln and you wanted to put it in there, you could do that too. Off the top of my head, I don't know the times or temperatures for the kiln firing, but I'm sure that I can look that up. So I will see you guys in the group. If you make any of this stuff, please post it in the group. And let's see, wait, is there metal shot in your tumbler or what? Yeah, there's I use stainless steel shot in my tumbler. It's a nice thing to have if you do this kind of work. So all right, guys, I will see you next time. Thanks for being here with me. I always enjoy it. And see you next time. Take care.